Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 103, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. If you are in the United States this week, you're probably going to be celebrating Thanksgiving. I am visiting my daughters, both of whom are now in Washington State. I don't know about you, but I have no idea where October and November went. This fall just zoomed by, and I haven't gotten as much sewing done as I'd like, but then again, I'm really only happy if I could be sewing 24/7, and that's just not going to happen. So I've dubbed November the month of coats because I've been working on some coat patterns. When I was in Seattle in October, I stopped in at Quilting Mayhem, and they had just put out the by Annie Bella Quilt coat pattern. So I picked that one up and brought it home and began working on it. I'm making a shop sample for the quilt store where I teach, and I'll be honest with you, I have kind of mixed feelings about this pattern. I like the design. I think it's a very modern, stylish design. I'm not crazy about the way the pieces are quilted because the instructions have you cut out little mini quilt sandwiches. So you cut out the pieces of fabric for each individual pattern piece. You cut a larger rectangle than the pattern piece and quilt it together with the batting and then cut the pattern piece out of that. I think that if I make this coat pattern again, and I probably will, I'm going to quilt yardage. I'm going to quilt a giant piece of fabric and then cut the pattern pieces out, because trying to quilt those individual small quilt sandwiches was very difficult. And that's how I ended up breaking my Q20 and throwing it out of time because, listen to the episode before last about my broken machine if you haven't already, and you'll hear what I did. I'm also not crazy about the sleeves on this pattern, and I suspect I'm going to end up redrafting them. I do that sometimes when I don't think a sleeve fits properly. I just found this sleeve to kind of bind at the back of the arm, and I think I know how to adjust it so that it gives me a little bit more ease back there. I also had to wait for the separating zipper. I understand. I know what it's like to have to release things and suppliers don't come through and whatever, but the pattern was released about 2 weeks before the separating zippers became available. So I have the whole thing ready to go. The separating zippers I ordered just came yesterday, and I just need to put the jacket together now, which I probably am not going to get to until the first week in December. A friend of mine recommended the Retazzo coat by Sew Liberated, and I think that may end up being my next quilted coat pattern. I also began working on the Chloe coat by Sew Over It, and I am just in love with this pattern. And I'm not even using my good fabric. I decided I wanted to make a muslin before I cut into my good fabric. I have some tweedy kind of coat fabric that I want to use to make this pattern. But I went to Hobby Lobby, and sorry, I know some of you don't like Hobby Lobby, but literally that's the only place I can go to get inexpensive fabric to make a muslin, so that I'm not cutting into my $30 or $40 a yard fabric right off the bat. And Hobby Lobby had some polyester corduroy, which I think was $11.99 full price, and I got it during one of the weeks when they had their fabric on sale for 30% off. It has turned out to be surprisingly nice to work with. It has worked really well for this jacket, and I'm going to finish it. I'm putting a flannel lining in it, and I think it's going to be a great knocking around jacket. It has been one of those patterns that almost makes itself. This polyester corduroy is actually fairly drapey. The sleeves on the Chloe coat are, how to describe them? They're not gathered at the top per se, but there is some fullness there. And I was a bit concerned about how that would look in the corduroy, but you can go look at the picture on my blog. I was really happy with the way the sleeves came out, and I got them in there on the first try, so that made me really happy. Sorry, I've got Simplicity 8742 Waiting in the Wings. That's an American Sewing Guild pattern, and I've got some black wool herringbone coating fabric for that one. So coats have been the thing this month, and I'm not sure how long that's going to last, but we'll just ride this wave for however long it lasts. The only other things I've been sewing have been pot holders. My daughter moved into her new house last week, and I had made her mother-in-law some pot holders a few years ago as a Christmas gift, and they're wearing out, so I promised to make her a new set. And I figured as long as I was doing some for my daughter's mother-in-law, I should do some for my daughter's new house. So when I was there visiting at the end of October, we stopped in at a quilt store and they each picked out some fabric. So I brought the fabric home and I've been knocking out pot holders for them. And I get the yardage quilted and then I cut the pot holders out, and then they usually sit in a pile for a couple of weeks until I decide that it's a good day to bind 24 pot holders. And they do make good Christmas gifts because almost everybody I know still cooks. So that's been the extent of the sewing. I want to talk a little bit about today's topic. One of the questions that I get fairly frequently is, how do I not lose my sojo, or how do I get my sojo back once it's decided to take a vacation? And I think today's guest has a great story about how she dealt with that problem. So without further ado, we're going to jump into today's podcast interview with Laura Wilson, and I will explain a little bit more about who Laura is in the intro. So I am here today with Laura Wilson, and Laura happens to be the sister of Cheryl Espinosa, who was a guest on episode 42 of the podcast. Cheryl owns Aunt Honey's Estate, which is an Etsy store specializing in vintage sewing patterns. And a few weeks ago, Laura contacted me with an interesting story to tell. So we're going to interview Laura today and find out how she got her sojo back with the help of her community. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Janet. It actually blew me away when you said Cheryl's episode was episode 42 and you just released your 100th episode.
It blows my mind too.
Wow, that's impressive.
Thanks. Yeah. When you contacted me, you said that this all started with a new job.
Mhm.
So, can we pick it up there and maybe talk about what happened and how you found community and then found your sojo again?
Yeah. So last year I had worked for the local municipality. I'd worked for the city for 10 years and I'd gotten very comfortable in that job, but it got to a point where I needed a change. And so there was a job posting still within the town I live in. And I was nervous to take it, but I thought I needed a change. I needed a challenge. And so I switched jobs. It's still in the field that I did, but there's just enough of a difference. And so yeah, I switched jobs. I'm 53 now. So it was one of those things I like, why would I switch jobs? You had pretty stable job at the city but I needed that change. I needed a challenge and decided to switch to this other one. And um the pay was great. I thought, oh, this is perfect. And then it didn't. I mean, I will say that the job was great, but what my process after taking that job was nothing that I expected. It was definitely something I was not prepared for.
So you found that it affected your personal life more than you expected.
It did. I have to laugh because I was talking to my supervisor and kind of sharing where I felt just these insecurities about not insecurities, my own insecurities that started to rise to the surface because it was a new job, there were new challenges, and I was telling my supervisor just these insecurities that I had, and she laughed. She's like, Laura, but you wanted a challenge, and I appreciate her understanding of of that, but I wasn't prepared for the insecure. Again, I wasn't prepared for how insecure I felt in my ability, in even my age, financial. I mean, it was a surprise that those were really just under the surface of this familiarity I had with my previous job. You know, I was comfortable and I was familiar, and sadly, because of what happened in my work and that change of everything I'd lost. And also losing a community, because in that my old job, I worked in an office with 5 to 7 other people that over 10 years I had developed a really strong relationship with in work. And you share personal things of your life, and then all of a sudden move to an office that we had the option to work remotely. So there was one other person in the office, and he's great, but it's he's a guy, and I I had lost that community, and I didn't realize how much that had also affected me of the importance, honestly, the importance of community. I mean, I have my church family and I have friends and I have a sewing group that I've been a part of, but it just was different because, when you're working full time, you're there 8 hours a day, and you almost spend more time with your work group than you do with your own family at times, depending on your job. But so all those things together really threw me for a loop that I wasn't prepared for. And I don't know how much you want me to go into the whole saga, or if you have questions, if you want to interrupt and ask me questions, that's fine.
I find it interesting that a lot of people in times of upheaval find comfort in things like sewing or knitting
Mhm.
or crafting. But for
Yeah.
you, it was like everything exploded and suddenly you had no anchor, it sounds.
Right. Oh, exactly. And it is kind of, I see it's funny now because I feel like I'm on the other side looking back, which hindsight's 2020. I guess we all know where that saying comes from now. But so during the time, I switched jobs. My husband ended up retiring early. That was not unexpected, or that was unexpected. And then the job change, and realizing that I just didn't, I I had lost confidence. Honestly, I just lost a lot of confidence in myself. And rather than turn to sewing, I ended up just really withdrawing. And it's kind of sad because there were moments where I honestly thought maybe I'll just sell my stuff. It's not, I didn't feel like I had this the skill, or even I call it the stick to itiveness, the to continue to sew or continue to create and it really make a difference. I mean, there were definitely a lot of times when I just looked around and was like, what does this even matter? And sadly, that was a lot. That 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 thought hung around quite a while. And I will say the only bright light in that time, a lot of times during Christmas, I actually never. Christmas has been a struggle with me for, as the kids were as when the kids were young, Christmas was fine, but as the kids got older, Christmas season was just always kind of hard. But last year was a year though that I decided to just put away all the social pressures and really focus on the true gift of Christmas. And so even though in what I felt like was a really hard year, there was still those moments of light, so I don't want to make it sound like I was just in the dumps for a whole year. But it was really kind of shocking again how much that that one transition blew up all of my other outlets that I typically find comfort in and find joy and inspiration. But it just wasn't the case this time.
I think a lot of us go through periods where we say, what does this matter? Or, maybe a month or a couple of months where we just don't feel like doing anything creative. For you, that went on and on and on for what sounds like an extended period of time.
Right. It felt forced. I mean, I think there were things I would pick up, but they weren't inspiring or they were temporary. And because I honestly, I learned how to do English paper piecing, but it still felt temporary. And it wasn't anything that I don't know, as a creator or as a sewist, there's something I think we can create or we can make, and it's almost just like a time filler. But then when we there's times where we can create and make, but it really feeds a deeper hunger and a deeper itch that we have to make something that it may inspire us or it may actually inspire somebody else. But the things I were picking up really was just there. I sad to say that they were time fillers. They were fun, but they didn't satisfy that deeper hunger and feed, that deeper need that I had. Yeah.
Was there a moment? Did you have an epiphany when you recognized what was going on and realized that maybe you needed to do something? Did it creep up on you?
It creeped up on me. So with the job change, it wasn't just the job change. It was let's see, October was when I started the new job. And then in May, at the end of May, my dad died. And I did not think I was going to get emotional about this. So at the end of May, dad died. And, that brought Cheryl and mom and I together again. And processing this whole new grief. And I didn't realize how hurt I was just dealing with hurts of losing community with my work and then losing dad. And I think what the slow process of coming out of that was actually being able to sit with those hurts and allow them a seat at the table, and while not letting them have monopolize the conversation, so to speak, of my emotions, but giving them a seat at the table and allowing them to process a little bit. But what had happened is, again, I still felt just meh, very blah about any type of sewing. And I decided to go to our local quilt store. And I actually think I've heard in one of your podcasts, you might have gone to it before. Uh, so I went to our local quilt store because they had an evening, just we call it a sip and sew, but it's an evening, you just bring your project, you work on it for a couple of hours. And I do have a sewing group that meets twice a month. But I think I was just yearning for a change of scenery a little bit. I love my sewing group, but I needed a little bit of a change of scenery. So I went and I was working on a handpiece project, and it was I didn't like it. I didn't like the colors I had chose. I didn't. It wasn't. It was going back to it was a time filler, but it wasn't a fueler. It didn't fuel. It just killed time, and I got there and I was just sharing with these ladies. I knew a couple of them a little bit. I know the long arm, Kinsey. I know her because we both are long armers, and that's really where my passion lies is long arming. But we were just chatting, and the gals there, they're like, Laura, you just need to get your sojo back. And I'd never heard that term, but it absolutely resonated when I realized I don't feel inspired. I just felt just so blah about this thing that has always been a core anchor, like you said, of 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 just who I am. And so they started showing me ideas and ended up I decided just, well, I'm gonna make a bag. And I've never made a bag before, and I'm not a garment sewer, so I have made garments before, but definitely not uh nothing to be proud of. I'll just say that. Cheryl's incredible, and yeah, mine are kind of silly. But and so I decided, yeah, I'm going to make a bag because what I could do is I could incorporate my love of long arming and just, take a big chunk of fabric, do just a long arm design on this chunk of fabric, and then make a bag. And so I found a by Annie pattern with the recommendations of the gals at the sewing or at the quilt store and the gals that I was sewing with. Um, and they were making these beautiful bags. They were just incredible. And it was something different enough. It was something new that I could try, but also could incorporate my existing love of that I do. But so I just started making a duffel bag, and why start easy? And that was when I said what I was going to start on, they were just like, "Oh, well, that's ambitious."
I sense a pattern here. You seem to like challenges.
Oh my goodness, I did not even recognize that until you just said it. Because yeah, what is wrong with me? I guess that's true. I mean, why test the water with your toes when you can jump in with both feet? But goodness. So yeah, I ended up making a duffel bag, and my goal was to get this bag done before uh we had Dad's celebration of life in August. And I got it done. I mean, I pulled some midnight hours, but I got it done. And I ended up entering that bag. I was really proud of it, honestly, because it was my first project like that. I was proud of it. And by Annie has like a monthly photo contest. And so I submitted the duffel bag in, and um, ended up finding out in September that I won the Storyteller Award. And it was just this recognition, or not even recognition, but it was a validation I needed to just put myself out there, try something new. And really the beauty of all of it is that it took me putting myself out there, again, trying something new, but meeting with that community at the quilt store that they were great cheerleaders. And and I think that's something that I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I've talked to some of my other friends, and we've all been through a spot of, what's this all worth? I think the community part was just so important because I had lost so much community when I had shifted that job.
Have you done any more bags? Is that something that, or was that a one and done type of thing?
No, I have done more bags. Actually, I didn't completely read the pattern first. And so I just took this, the pattern calls for, say it called for 2 yards of fabric. So I thought, okay, I'll take this 2 yards and I'll just quilt these 2 yards. And so I did. So I had all this leftover quilted fabric. And so I ended up making another bag. So now I have my duffel bag and I have a tote bag that is a matching tote bag. And I still have fabric left over that I can make another one. I loved it. Honestly, I loved that process of making a bag because there's a function for it. So I will definitely be making more bags. My kids have already requested some Christmas gifts, but I don't know. On November the 7th, we'll see if I don't know if I'll get anything done by Christmas or not, but
Yes, time is growing short.
no, but they know where I live, so
There you
that's
go.
they both live in town. My daughter-in-law and my daughter both live in town, so we'll figure something out.
Is it okay if I mention that you live in central Western Washington
Oh yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
West Central Washington?
I think probably depending on where you live, we're central or we're west central or yeah. Yeah, I mean, I live in Ellensburg, Washington, and so we live on the dry side of the state, which that's the important part. We live on the dry side of the state.
You are on the route that I take to get to Seattle, so I am quite
Yeah,
familiar with Ellensburg.
yeah, that's us. I grew up in Kansas, and whenever my husband and I were talking about we used to live in Alaska. In fact, is where I learned to quilt out was in Alaska. A friend of mine, she had said there was a great quilt store in Valdez, and she said, "Laura, you really should learn how to sew or quilt." And I told her I don't want to because I know I'll love it and I don't need another hobby. And I mean, peer pressure, I just gave in and we I picked up quilting and I have not looked back since then. And then, long arming just came naturally because I've always been a doodler. I love to doodle, and I found that I like long arming more than I like piecing, honestly. But uh yeah, so Central Washington, it's great. It's very much like where I grew up in Kansas and farming community. I love it here.
What's the name of your store there? I'm not sure I've been there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess it's called Wendy's Stitches and Stash.
No, I
And
haven't been there.
oh, you should. It's in our historic downtown, and they've got their storefront is incredible. It's on Main Street, and it's just been so exciting to see them continue to grow. And their store is an incredible store, and the people there are great. I love them.
Well, I'm going back to Seattle for Thanksgiving, so I'll swing by
Yep, yep.
on my
They're
way.
And if you're lucky, they have a little bulldog there named Chewy, and he has to stay. He stays somewhat in his timeout section up in a different sewing section, but he's just a funny dog. But yeah, there it's like I said, it was that group of people that really helped pull me out of this. And you asked me if it was a slow process, and it was a slow process, but I think what I don't know what I was working on. I think it might have been after I finished my second bag that I just felt excited to sew again. And I mean, it was almost like I couldn't contain the ideas that I started to get, like, oh, I want to work on this. I want to work on this. And sadly, I still have my full-time job. So I don't have all the time that I'd love to have to sew, but I just got to keep, documenting the ideas and and use my time wisely.
I think that one of the things that I'm sensing from your story is that you recognize the importance of not pushing away feelings or trying to put a lid on them, but
Mhm.
rather say, this is how I'm feeling now. This is normal. This is part of life,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not seeing it as something wrong or abnormal, which I think is a very healthy way to approach it.
Right. Oh, for sure. And I noticed my tendencies, and I realize we're talking more about probably human emotion. Well, we are talking more about human emotions than sewing. And I think what was important to me is I also recognize that we go through things, and especially as sewists and something that we hold so dear, we're still human. But yeah, to recognize those feelings and to not think something's wrong with me, or oh, I just have to force myself out of this. I have to just sew my way out of this. I just have to force these projects that bring me no joy whatsoever. And I think that might be kind of a hard thing to I sometimes I think that's a hard place to be, because it's important to do something every day related to sewing. Um, but also, how do I balance? I have no joy, I have no desire, but yet this is the only thing I want to do. It was tricky there for a while. And honestly, I would tend to withdraw. And I think that's where the community part really is so important, is to, for me at least, it was to not withdraw. But like you said, to recognize these tendencies.
Sometimes we lose our sense of self or part of our sense of self, and to have the
Mhm.
community be able to reflect that back to us.
Right, right. And the importance of surrounding ourselves with a group of people that you're willing to be a little bit vulnerable with and transparent. And that's something that, honestly, again, going back to Cheryl, way back when I was a young mom, she had said, Laura, we are never going to we do other moms a disservice by not being vulnerable or being transparent, like pretending we have it all together. And I feel like that is so applicable in so many different areas in our groups. And I think about my sewing, I think about, this thing that just absolutely I enjoy. Um, and it wouldn't do me any good. It wouldn't do anybody else any good to not be vulnerable or not be transparent about the struggles that I'm going through. Because either one, somebody might have an answer or a suggestion, or two, maybe somebody else is going through it, which is one of the reasons why I reached out to you is so there's hope, but also, there somebody might have an answer and just an encouragement to just put yourself out there a little bit. I mean, within reason. I'm not going to share the nitty gritty of everything I don't know, but that was an important part to be able to be more vulnerable to share those struggles that I was having.
One of the questions that I get very frequently when I get feedback from listeners is how do I get my sojo back? Where has my
Oh,
motivation gone?
mm-hmm,
So I
mm-hmm,
think this is really an important topic. And I lay a lot of the blame at the foot of social media
100%.
because you go to Instagram and all you see is perfection.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare to see somebody say, hey, this project didn't go the way I planned.
Yeah, yeah. And it's hard, I think, with social media to be able to tell the full story in a 30-second clip or a string of pictures. It's hard to really pull out the emotional impact that somebody might or the emotions that somebody might be going through. It's funny that you mentioned social media. I would like to be more active on Instagram, but I've struggled with it because I don't want it to seem so me focused. I'd rather it be an us type of focus, and I don't really know how to convey that. But I, with my other social media, I've really tapered off because I found that it was stealing a lot of joy and it was stealing a lot of inspiration. And I think that has actually, if there's a tangible uh, something to put into place would to figure out a way to limit time on social media. I mean, we hear it over and over again, but until I really started doing it, I think that's when I felt my brain and my creativity start to ramp up too, is whenever I limited the amount of time on social media. But yeah, I agree. Social media can be great sources of inspiration, but great stealers of inspiration.
100%. I totally
Yeah.
agree with you.
Yeah.
So it's a year later. Have you
Uh-huh.
settled into your job, your new job?
I have. It's amazing. So right around the same time as I started feeling the sojo come back, I started to just finally gain confidence in my job. And this realization, and I think this was a big key takeaway for so much of everything that I'd gone through, was that effort rather than my ability. I didn't, with my job, I hadn't been exposed to certain aspects of it. So I'm actually a planner, so a land use planner. And the current job I have, we write a lot of guidance documents and policy documents for cities and counties. And I had not done that before. I'd done other parts of planning, but I haven't written guidance documents. Um, and so it right about at a year, I just realized, no, I am actually very capable of learning. So I don't have the ability, but I sure have the effort. And I think that's something that we can apply in our sewing, or I don't even want to just say sewing, but our creativity, that 90% is just showing, or I don't want to say, but maybe 50%. I don't know what the percentage is. We just show up. We make the effort. We might not have the ability, but we make the effort. And specifically when it came to all of these insecurities that had risen to the surface, that, making the effort and not focusing so much on my ability, as it related to specifically the insecurities. So yeah, a year later, I feel so much better in my job. I'm not perfect at it by any means, but I actually enjoy going to work now. as opposed to thinking, what am I even doing here? And again, I see it reflect in my my sewing, my long arm, my creativity. I see it reflecting in that too.
That's awesome. That is a great takeaway from the experience.
Yeah. And I mean, it was a year. That's a long time. And I look back, I'm like, that's a long time to be in that place of struggle. And again, it wasn't 100% horrible all the time. But as much as we may want it to flip overnight because it's so hard being in that place, I think sometimes being in those hard places also makes us stronger and more resilient. And if we can learn, also pass that on to somebody else.
I was just going to say, I think that there are probably a number of people in the audience listening to this who can identify with that struggle.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I hope that this serves as some encouragement for them. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah. Thanks. And yeah, if I hope that life isn't always rainbow and butterflies but it always won't stay crummy either.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Janet.
I felt like Laura's story was important to share because, especially in this age of social media, and I'm reminded of that saying, comparison is the thief of joy. Sometimes we lose sight of what it is that feeds our souls, and having that community around to reflect that back to us and help us to remember who we are is very important. So I appreciate that Laura was willing to make herself vulnerable and come on the podcast and talk about it. And I hope that this will serve as an encouragement for those of you who might be struggling. As always, I love feedback. You can use the fan mail feature. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. You can email me. I do try to respond to all emails. My email address is janet@janetzabo.com. The show notes can be found on the podcast website at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com with links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and my blog. And the blog is probably the best place to get commentary and photos about my current sewing projects. For those of you in the States, I hope that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, however you choose to spend it. I travel to see my girls. My husband is enjoying the time off by himself in his workshop. And he said Thanksgiving Day is one of the few days of the year when his phone doesn't ring constantly. So that's how he chooses to spend his Thanksgiving. So however you choose to spend yours, I hope it's a wonderful day for you. And hopefully you'll get to go sew something.